Okay guys, it's finally time to talk about it. Let's talk about the VanPowers Superpower Pro. Hello adventurers and welcome back to my channel. Today is finally the day where after I've been going months and months using this power station, we can talk about it. I wanted to really put it through a rigorous set of tests, and along the way I've kind of been talking to you as to what I feel on certain things, but just for a recap, these are some of the situations that I encountered over the time of traveling from January all the way up until April using the VanPowers. Okay guys, as you can see, I have the VanPowers here and I was doing some water. And in order for me to use this kettle, if this is sitting across here where it clearly fits, I have to pull it out to access the side port. And I can see how the side port could be good for some things, but when it comes to tiny spaces, I shouldn't have to move things out every time just to be able to use it. And so having everything on one side is really convenient sometimes because it's just a lot easier to access those things versus having to move it, especially considering how heavy this guy is. This makes it a little bit harder to use this because I do have to move it. And it does have wheels. So initially I thought that would be easier because I could just lift it up and then roll it out, but it's kind of lumpy on the wheels because the floor itself is not super even. And so if you're not on an optimum surface, that can be kind of the downside to this power station. Let me show you more of what I mean. In order to move it, I have to kind of maneuver it in a weird way. So I unplugged it and I can't just use this roller to roll it back because it doesn't go as flat as it needs to. So I end up having to kind of push it into place to get it where it needs to be. And you can see that this is about the same size as my actual seat was. So I thought this would be a good place for it. But finding out that it had those plugs on the side really was kind of a womp womp moment for me. Even though there are the access ports here that are all like USB-Cs and then also the regular ports, the plugs that I actually need for things like this are unfortunately on the side. As you can see, I've had some thoughts, and so I thought now was the time while I'm undoing my van here, I'm going to take it inside and talk to you all a little bit more about some of those thoughts and what my overall conclusions are, and also address, will this be back in my van again, or will this be something that I keep here at base camp? I think it's one of those things that as we test different stations, it's important to realize that some things work in certain situations and some don't. And so these are just my thoughts. If you are interested in this, I'm going to leave a link below for the actual VanPowers power station. And I'm going to tell you some of the pros and cons in my opinion. Ooh, first and foremost, let's talk about how heavy this guy is. Whew, it definitely is not a lightweight power station. It is chunky and yeah, it's pretty heavy. In fact, this is probably the heaviest power station that I have had in the van yet. Now, it and the rock pails are very close when it comes to the weight, but this one definitely is the heavyweight. With that, there are a few extra features though that none of the other power stations I've ever tried have. So we're gonna get to those in just a minute. But before you do, I'm gonna rest because that was heavy. So while I take a little bit of a break, check this out. This was the very first time I got it out of the box and the very first test that I ever did with it. This was before I took it on the road in January. So this was like the last part of December. And so this is what my initial thoughts were from the first time out of the box. Okay guys, we're doing the very first test of the VanPowers Superpower Pro. The first thing that I did was I fully charged it all the way up to 100%, and then I plugged a couple things into it just to make sure everything was working, and I depleted it to about 90%. Then I decided I was going to go ahead and leave the AC turned on. So I wanted to see if it was turned on and there was nothing plugged in, if it would in fact drain portions of the battery, and as you can see, it is. However, it is now, again, 47% of the way, and this has been going for about 2 days, just slowly dwindling down because, again, I've had that AC turned on. So I'm going to continue testing this to see how many more hours it will take to get all the way to dead. Then I'm going to go ahead and charge it back up, and we'll start plug and play with some other things. I might also turn on the DC side just to see if it does the same thing with the slow like trickle down. I like to do all of these things before I actually put it in the van so I know what to expect. because I do think it's important. You'll notice that the screen has like a little screen saver that after it's been on for a few minutes, it just turns off. If you do want to see what that looks like again, you just click the power button, it comes right back up. Again, you'll notice that the main thing that is taking the power right now is the fan. The fan turns on and off in kind of cycles just because that's how it has to run. So this is good information before we even hit the road. So while it's doing this, let's go ahead and just pull the handle up and we'll roll it to another position so it's not in the middle of the room. Yep, we can finish this test right here. Okay guys, since we've talked about my first impressions and some of the things I've encountered along the way, let's get to it. Let's go over my full review of the VanPowers and kind of some of my thoughts. And trust me, I have some thoughts. Now let's start off by talking about size. This is one of the largest power stations that I have tried. It is a big, bulky power station. And as you noticed, it's pretty heavy. So this is not going to be one that's going to be super simple for someone who has like a limited ability to lift. And even though they did make a few little concessions in way of putting wheels on this, in fact, you can see these on both sides, and it has like a suitcase, briefcase, like handle on it, like an airport, like piece of luggage. This is somewhat limiting in certain situations. For example, whenever I'm in my tiny van and I need to slide it from side to side, you can't really slide it with these wheels because it makes it heavier and harder to maneuver, as opposed to some of mine that you could just scoot. So this is one that you have to kind of set into a place, or it can go forward or backward, but side to side is not really as much of an option. Now, realistically, how often do you need to slide it from side to side? Well, I found in my tiny van that was a lot more frequently than I ever thought it would be. So even though the power station itself has lots of power and it does have these special features, those features don't always work in regards to every scenario. So that's one of the things that I learned very quickly and very early on. Now, when it comes to the plugs, I found it very interesting that there were no USB plugs, only USB-C outlets. And even though they do offer 4, a lot of my devices that I have that have not converted over yet, they don't necessarily work with this unless you have a converter. So that makes it a little bit harder unless you want to use the other side, which is the plugs. Which brings me to my next point. I learned really quickly that for me to be able to use a standard plug, a USB plug, I would have to use a plug brick. And that means that I couldn't plug it into the front face. So how I would set the power station in the van itself, again, a very small van, would dictate how much that I could use this. Now, my goal was to use this for my refrigerator so that I could put it under my bed right next to my fridge. And well, that didn't necessarily work out because for me to have my van set up in the orientation that it was set up in, it's like this. I have the back of my seat, my driver's seat, then I have my bed. Under my bed, directly behind the seat, is where my refrigerator lives. And then a power station to plug it directly into so they could be side by side. Now on front-facing power stations, this works out great. However, in order for me to plug in my fridge to this guy, the cord would have to loop across and then over to this side. Now, when I made it to this side, there's tons of places you can plug in. You know, you have 6 different outlets, which is absolutely awesome. And then you have this one 12-volt outlet with a cover, which is a huge win for me because I really like whenever they cover things, because then if you're not using it, nothing gets in there and corrupts it. However, if you're in a tight space and you're hoping to have something setting closer to this, a plug sticks out, and a 12-volt plug definitely sticks out. So that made it a little bit more difficult to use. So I thought, well, I can just turn the power station so this part faces out, but then I can't see the display. So problem again with that. Now I'm sure you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is just a terrible review. But at the same time, this isn't a bad power station. It's not perfect for every situation. Now, if this was able to be out just like this, it's an excellent power station. So if you had it on a top load or even out in a larger van, it would be great. However, in a compact space, when you have to really maneuver things, it does make it a little bit more difficult. I also tried to place it where my passenger seat has been removed and just thought, okay, well, maybe I can face it back toward the back. But even in that area, with a cord sticking out the side, it was a bit wide and bulky. And so it didn't really work out very well. So in conclusion on that particular part, I don't know that this one will go back into the van again. However, I don't want to discount it. Again, very good power station. Just doesn't necessarily check the boxes that I personally need. Now that doesn't mean it's not going to check your boxes. Again, if you have a little bit more room or you have this sitting up higher, it could work out. In fact, if you just had it where as soon as you walk in, there's your door and you're open and in a correct orientation, that might work. But I noticed that trying to set it up next to my shelf, it hung out a little bit too far into my aisle because again, it's pretty bulky. And with the plugs on this side, if I put it into my van right up next to my door, that means that those plugs are gonna go right up next to the door and they're going to have a lot of rub. And so I tried everything. It just became really stressful. In my opinion, this is the only power station I've ever actually been stressed about because again, it's a good power station, and I don't want to take away from that. I'm just saying in a smaller space, it's just a little too cumbersome, I think. But let's talk about the actual power station itself. The display is very nice. So once you turn it on, let's see, there it is. Oops. I clicked it a little too hard there. Big, beautiful display. I really like how the readout screen works. I really love that at nighttime you can see this even in the dark. I like that you can turn on your AC and DC very easily and that they are separate, because sometimes in the dark, whenever you're trying to reach for something, you might click one instead of the other. So having them separate was very, very nice. There's also a reset button, which I did learn when I plugged in my fridge a couple of times. It did run the entire battery down, but it's because it needed to be reset. I don't really know what to do about that in that regard, but it is nice that you can have this reset so that it does do some interesting things. But whenever I was using this as a whole, as for power consumption, your average everyday devices all work on this extremely well. And I was even able to power my kettle, which my kettle, of course, is a very high ticket item when it comes to power. And so that was super useful. In fact, out of all of the items that I use in my van, that one draws the most for that surge power. So I was able to easily plug that in, and that pulls about, I want to say it's about 650 to 700 watts, and it kind of alternates depending on what's going on. And so on average, at that being the highest thing that's drawing, I could run that thing for a while. And you saw the tests that I did kind of throughout time with that kettle. But I also tested it out with my laptop, because I mentioned several times on the channel that my laptop draws about 45 to 60 consistent watts when it has to be plugged in. And because I've used my laptop so much, anytime that I'm working, it just has to be plugged in at this point because my batteries are starting to weaken. So if I'm working for 4 or 5 hours on my laptop, this thing has no problem. It will still maintain a very high structure of power that I can use after that. So this works on all of the electronics that I have in the van, no problems. I'm yet to find anything that it won't work on. I can run my Road Pro on it. I can run all of my fans. I can run my computer. I can run my refrigerator. I could run several of those things at the same time. And as long as this reset button has not gotten hit in the meantime of me doing that, it runs very similarly to all of the other larger power stations that I've tried out here on the channel. That one day where the fridge ran it down in a day though, that really made me notice that once this is turned on, if anything touches that button just barely, see that? See how sensitive that is? It just takes a little tiny push. Whereas some of the other power stations, it's more of a click. This is just a brush up against push. So you could by accident turn something on and not mean to and walk away, and it will continue to drain. Yeah, that's one of the things that I noticed. So as long as you're mindful, you're perfectly good. And it does make that ding noise, so it definitely lets you know that it happened. But if you just happen to be chunking stuff back into your van and don't hear the ding, you could come back to your van and your van have a little less power than you thought it should. Now the display itself, it does have indicator lights near the DC, the power, the reset, and the AC. And whenever you're using it, it literally is just a single tap. And then you can see which device is ready to go based on the indicators here. Now, one of the things that I did notice is as soon as the AC turns on, there is the fan. The fan runs this thing down so much more quickly. So if you're using the AC, even if you have nothing plugged into it, the fan is operational. And so that is something to note. And so overall, that does increase the ability for this to run down a little bit more quickly. And you wouldn't even know it. This definitely is not the only power station that does that. In fact, the Pecron, which I also love, it does that as well. If you click the button, it will turn on the fan and the fan will slowly drain the battery. So you have to be really mindful of the batteries because of those settings being turned on. Again, I don't dislike this. I like this, and as an average person using this, this is going to be great. However, those are just some things to think about if you're investing in this big boy. Now let's talk about the input. The input comes in on the opposite side of all of the plugs. So it's over here, and it has a little lift up that allows you to input using several different input devices. Now, this is kind of interesting because I noticed also that there is a 20 amp overload protection button here too. And that is very different than any other power station that I've tried out. I really appreciate that. It also plugs into two different kinds of plugs, and this made it able to be plugged into my regular shore power if I was at a campsite, or I could plug it into like one of the converters that go into my van so I could pull it directly off of the van, or I could plug this to any solar panel that I had. So as you know, I carry a lot of different solar panels, and I was really pleased whenever I tried it out on each one of them that I could use every single one of those portable panels. But they also do make a very good solar panel, and I really like their solar panel. In fact, I will probably take their solar panel with me on the road again because of the size, the weight. It's just a good feel to it overall. And even though this thing is a little bit more bulky, I will take the solar panel because, again, hands down, really love it. I would compare it to some of the other ones on the market that you've seen me carrying for quite some time at a slightly lesser price point. So there's that. Another thing that I would like to say is, just because, again, this doesn't work out for me in the van does not mean I won't be using this. This is a perfect power station to have here in my tiny home because since it does have the wheels, I can take it to wherever I need it at any given time and then use it. And so if I need to work on something outside, I can pull up the little handle, walk it outside, take it down the ramp, and boom, I have power anywhere in my yard. Or here at my tiny home inside, if I'm working on a project and I need a little extra power, I can, here it is. It's in my living room, it's in my bathroom, it's in my bedroom, and it's all on wheels. So I don't have to do that heavy lifting every single time. And that is amazing. So if you're wanting to get a good power station for your shop, for school, for your home, for a backup, this one is a great one. And it's a big enough power bank that you can power a lot of different things. But enough of that. Let's talk about the actual, how much do certain things draw, and I'll show you a few examples. Heat always takes up a lot of power, so let's try a toaster. A toaster will definitely run off of this, but let me show you. Okay, we're going to start off by plugging it in one-handed. Never easy. There we go. And then as we do, we're going to make sure that the AC is turned on. I'm going to turn off the DC because we don't have anything plugged into it. And then I'm going to turn on the toaster just for a couple minutes. Okay, the toaster is turned on, and you can see right here, 688 watts. You can hear the fan. It started off at 91%, and it says that if we needed to run this toaster, we could run it approximately 2.5 hours before this thing would die at 90%. So you're looking at probably a little bit over, I want to say probably 2.7 hours if it was fully charged. And you can see inside, I don't have anything in there except for some crumbs because I need to clean it out. Don't judge that. I can definitely smell the toaster right now. And the one thing that I will say is if you're wanting to check how much consumption you're having, you're going to have to click around again to get it to show you. And then looky there, the toast would have been done, and now it's going to stop and go down. So we lost 1% making toast. Now that I have distributed crumbs all around my kitchen, and now I know that I need to clean out my toaster. Wow, thought I'd already done that. It's time to try a hairdryer. Now, how many times have you been in your van and thought, oh my gosh, if I could just dry my hair? But hair dryers aren't something that we can typically use in a van because they just take too much power. So let's find out if we can use this hair dryer. If we can use this, we can use pretty much anything. Okay, again, it's time to plug it in, and you'll notice that plugs face different directions, which is for ease of use. So let's see which plug would work best. I think this one will. Okay, it's in. Yeah, definitely needed 2 hands. But now we're gonna see if we can run a hairdryer. Again, starting off at 90%, and the fan has turned on. So now it's time. Let's see, as I pull this back, and you probably won't be able to hear me very well, but just watch the numbers. Okay, this should work way, way better. So let's click the button again, and it is on. The fan is on, and here we go. That's low. Okay. Now let's go high. Did you see that? It got up to 1,300 watts. So again, this thing can handle the load of just about everything. And going at 1,300, you could have gone for about 1 hour and 7 minutes blow drying your hair. Now, if you can't get your hair dry in 1 hour and 7 minutes, you have some very thick hair. But this just goes to show that, again, this power station has the capability of really pulling. And so, again, I really do like it. I just wish it maneuvered a little bit better in my van orientation, and I don't want to change my layout just to use it. But realistically, if I did, this could power everything in my van for a while, because even with that 1,300 watts, again, I only had it going for a couple minutes, but 89%. So it dropped it 1% in 2 minutes. So for every 2 minutes that you're using a hairdryer on high, it's dropping 1%. And yeah, now the fan is going to go off for just a few minutes because it has to cool down after that surge of energy. So this is what it sounds like. A little bit of a louder fan, but again, it's just doing its job. So that's kind of what it has to do when it has that massive amount of power coming out. But I consider this guy a win in all reality. Again, not everything is going to work out for every single situation, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad situation. So if you have space, look at the VanPower. Definitely look at the VanPower. If you are looking for something not for your van, look at the VanPower. Definitely look at the VanPower. It's not a bad power station in the slightest. It's a very hefty guy, which is why it's also so heavy, because it's so hefty, I guess. I don't know. Hefty and heavy go together. Let's unplug this. And again, see, the plugs all go in different directions. Pretty cool. I think you can also see why I was so confused whenever my refrigerator completely ran it down, because this thing, that's not typical. This is hardy, it's strong, and it has a lot more power than the power station that I usually run my refrigerator on. So whenever I figured out that that reset button thing was there, that fixed everything. So that was an error on my part, but at the same time, sometimes when you're on the road and you're in that frantic moment, you just don't think. So I definitely give a big thumbs up to VanPower. I think that they've put together a great product. I think they've put a lot of consideration into certain aspects of it when it comes to the ability to roll it. That is so phenomenal. I think this is a really great high power station. I just wish that they had the USB on there so you wouldn't have to plug into a brick. Of course, whenever you're using a USB, it's going to take less power than as soon as you put a brick in there, it instantly starts pulling more power. I don't know why. That's just unfortunately how technology works. I also wish that they had the plugs on the front display as maybe in addition to the ones on the side. I know that EcoFlow uses the ones on the side and people really like that, but for the average person who has a smaller space, having things forward facing as opposed to around sometimes just works a little bit better. Maybe I'm not the ideal customer that they're looking for. I don't know. But again, it's not a deal breaker. It just makes it a little bit more difficult if you're in a compact area. So overall, I hope this is helpful. I know that you've seen me go through the ups and downs with this power station. I highly recommend it if you have a larger space. Definitely recommend the solar panel, even if you're running other like power stations, because I really love their solar panel. And you know, I'm gonna keep this one at base camp fully charged because here in Texas, we lose power a few times a week sometimes. And now I won't have to go without my basic things of being able to edit or keeping cold food because I have a little backup fridge here. I can just throw it all in there and everything will be good because I now have something that's reliable for many, many hours. So yeah. And remember guys, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time. Bye!